You are probably somebody who fights for love, but they may not be. Why is it that dismissive avoidants let relationships slip away, often without a word? In today's video, we are going to break down the psychology behind what's actually happening so that you can heal, process, and move on. There are four major things happening all the time, and I'm actually going to take you through a slide so you can see this yourself and summarize it. So here we have the four major things, and I'm actually at the end as well going to take you through an exercise that you can take part in to work on changing this. And I'm going to explain what all of these different steps here that you see actually mean. So the first reason the avoidant doesn't attach in a relationship and really work through and fight for a relationship if it's starting to fall apart or unravel is that they are constantly operating from feelings minus fears. Now, I say this on this channel a lot, but there's a couple of really important caveats here. Dismissive avoidants in particular, when they are entering into a relationship, they often show up as their best self very early on. But the moment an attachment is really formed, the moment there's actually this deeper connection and they start to feel vulnerable and they start to feel like they have real feelings that they're developing for somebody, this in particular is what will cause them to deactivate. Now, let's say they have really strong feelings for you. Let's say their feelings are like at a 9 out of 10 of strength and intensity. But let's say that their fears are at a 7 or an 8. Well, you basically have somebody who's operating at like a net +2 in terms of how they're going to show up and really try to develop the relationship and invest in the relationship. And 2 is a pretty small number if we're looking at a sort of ratio out of 10, like a 20% investment in somebody. That's not a really good way of showing up. But this happens often because dismissive avoidants are carrying all these fears. And I want to explain this concept for a second. You'll see this here. It's a catalyst for wounds. The attachment being formed is a catalyst for wounds. What do I mean by this? Well, what I mean is that our subconscious mind, if you didn't already know this, is responsible for roughly 95 to 97% of your beliefs, your thoughts, your emotions, and your behaviors or actions. It's why we talk about the subconscious mind so much on this channel. And as somebody who has a big background in hypnotherapy originally, in order to actually create transformation, we really need to be engaging principles of how we can recondition the subconscious mind in the process. And I'm not going to get into all of that right now. We'll get into this in the exercise part and how we can help shift our behavioral patterns as well as potentially somebody else's in a healthy way. But what I mean by this is your subconscious mind stores everything. It stores all of your memories and experiences. Now, it does consolidate these memories over time, and research does show that sometimes our memories can shift and change as they get consolidated ever so slightly. But what happens is we store all of our wounding. So what we know about avoidance is they generally grow up in a household, dismissive avoidance in particular, with childhood emotional neglect. In other words, they tend to be quite neglected. And what this does is that causes a child who's actually wired for connection and yearns for connection to feel this deep sense of rejection and shame. Like, oh, what's wrong with me that I can't get my needs met when I'm yearning for this emotional connection from my parents? But when they don't get these needs met, they store their feelings and experiences around vulnerability and being a young child and how vulnerable that feels, needing something from somebody else and trying to rely on that from somebody, but they're not able to give it. They store that with shame and with fear and with pain. So when you first start dating a dismissive avoidant, you won't see that, right? You're going to see them feeling confident, comfortable, ready to show up for the date, charming, on their best behavior. But it's once there's actually this attachment bond that is formed that now all of these wounds of childhood emotional neglect, that deep attachment, well, what does that remind the subconscious mind of? The subconscious mind goes, oh, I remember what it's like to feel deeply attached. And it makes me feel like I'm going to be neglected or rejected or that I'm shameful and it feels too vulnerable and I don't like it. And that's when you start to see the person really pull back and become more afraid. Now, I want to let you know if you want to do a deeper dive into healing, you can actually check out the Attachment Styles and Sex course free for life. So it's a giveaway we're doing. You'll be able to dive into that course. It goes so much into detail in regards to different attachment styles, their patterns, their themes, the relationship they have to intimacy, so that you are going to be able to have resources and tools you need to explore your own patterns and take the necessary steps to heal. Number 2, Dismissive avoidants tend to have this belief, this expectation where they think relationships should always be easy. I think it's really important to acknowledge that we have expectations. This is all of us, not just dismissive avoidance. We have expectations when we are in a state of learned helplessness. In other words, we tend to expect things from others in the exact places where we don't know how to get those things met in our own relationship to ourselves. You can see this really obviously, right? Like anxious attachment styles, they tend to struggle to self soothe. So they tend to expect that their loved ones are always there to soothe them. You'll see fearful avoidants. They tend to expect that nobody should ever break their trust ever because they have all these trust wounds. They don't really know how to trust until they do a lot of the subconscious work and heal. And so they tend to expect everybody to be absolutely 100% honest all the time. I'm not saying that that's a bad standard to have in a relationship. Honesty and integrity are important things. But I mean, like fearful avoidance can think about leaving a relationship the moment that somebody tells a white lie, for example, right? So that represents the learned helplessness. Dismissive avoidance, their version of this is that they struggle to work through hard relationship challenges because they don't have modeling for this. So if they've never seen conflict hashed out, oh, I'm feeling this way. Okay. I understand why you're feeling that way. What do you need? I need this. If they haven't seen conflict moved through proper conflict communication, well, then they're in learned helplessness. They don't know how to move through conflict. So if I'm somebody walking around with the conditioning or programming that says, I am, never going to be able to move through conflict. Well, guess what's going to happen? I'm going to expect that I can find the perfect partner who will make relationships always easy so we never have to get into conflict. Just like if I'm a fearful avoidant, I would expect that I find the perfect partner who never lies, or if I'm anxiously attached, the perfect partner who will always self-soothe me. We tend to outsource our ability to get these needs met through these different veils, right? It's like, okay, if I can't do this, my partner better do it for me. This is another reason that an avoidant won't fight for a relationship. The moment they see conflict, they're like, oh, this isn't supposed to be how it is, right? That's their programming, which is really a lack of awareness because of limited modeling. The third one here is they flaw-find. Dismissive avoidants do this all the time. They flaw-find as a self-protection mechanism. They won't do this early on so much, before they make that attachment, but it's once the actual attachment has been formed that then they begin to flaw-find. They'll look for all the flaws and all the reasons that this may not work out and why this person may not be the right person for them. They're doing this from a place of trying to reassure themselves they don't need somebody. So if the person doesn't show up and meet their needs, they'll be fine without them. And it's actually a self-protection mechanism, again, as a result of childhood emotional neglect. If you grow up in a household where there's a lot of neglect that happens to your emotions, you don't want to feel that vulnerable again. So you want to convince yourself that you don't need to be vulnerable to anybody. And that's your way of coping. Number 4, dismissive avoidants do not know how to co-regulate. What does that mean? If I am in a position in a relationship where I think I'm supposed to meet some of your needs, maybe not a ton of them, but some of them, and you sure request them from me, and I don't know how to let you in to meet mine, we are not able to regulate together. Part of co-regulation in relationships, which is actually a pillar of having a securely attached dynamic with somebody, is that I can notice that I don't feel good, realize I need something from you, share what that need is with you, get that need met through you, and you can do the same for me. And there's reciprocity. Because avoidants are so afraid to let people in, because at a root level, they're too afraid to be vulnerable, they don't know how to co-regulate. So what will happen is they'll be in these kind of one-sided relationships. So here's something that's really tricky and confusing for people. You're like, what do you mean one-sided relationships? Avoidants usually end up in relationships with people who are very giving and very generous. And this is true. But have you ever been in a position as a person where somebody's really pouring into you and they're giving all these things to you, but they just happen to be things that you don't need? That you say, oh, no, I don't need that. And they keep giving it to you. What ends up happening is it feels confusing, right? It doesn't feel like you're really getting your needs met or replenished if those needs that are being met are not things you really need from them. And this happens a lot with dismissive avoidance. They end up in relationships with very generous partners, but because they're unwilling to really receive from people and really open themselves to people, it doesn't feel like they're letting themselves get their needs met by other people. So people pour in and it's kind of like it falls on deaf ears. Like the person, it doesn't even land with them when somebody's really generous the vast majority of the time. Now, there are particular needs that avoidants do have, and we do talk about those in other videos on here, but relationships will often burn them out because they don't know how to communicate what they actually need to a partner. So they're often getting needs met that they don't actually need. And as a result of that, they struggle to co regulate. They don't feel emotionally balanced when in the company of other people for prolonged periods of time. Now, this is a very simplistic description of co regulation. So, you're in a relationship, it's falling apart, it's with a dismissive avoidant, and you're wondering, like, why are they not showing up and fighting for the relationship? Well, what can you actually do? Number one, you have to set a deadline. If the relationship's not going well, the last thing that you want is to end up investing in a relationship for a very long time where somebody is not available to you. In other words, you don't want to be in a relationship fighting for something, the only one really fighting in the relationship for 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, because it's not fair to you. So you set a deadline so you get out of the gray area. That deadline is a very individual decision. For some people, if they've been in a relationship for 10 years, the deadline might be 1 year. If you've been in a relationship for 1 year, the relationship might be 3 months, right? It's going to depend on how much you want to invest and for how long. Now, within this deadline period of time, let's say, for example, it's 3 months that you're going to try to work this out, you need to see, does the needle move? That's one of the most important things. Does the needle move? Are there quantifiable improvements? Okay. In other words, are there measurable improvements? Do I see that we text much more throughout the week, or that this person works through conflict 50% more, or that this person is more vulnerable or makes more of an effort? So you need to be clear about how long will I invest in this relationship for, and what would I be looking to see change. Then you want to, in communication, question some of these expectations. It's a good conversation to have with an avoidant. Hey, I know that sometimes we have conflict, but do you think it's a fair expectation to have, or a realistic expectation to have, that relationships should always be easy and we should never have a conflict? Or do you think that we should have a partner where there's an exact perfect fit and we don't have any flaws to share with one another? Or do you think it's more reasonable that, hey, we're going to have flaws, but we want to learn to work through those things and communicate about those things so that we can solve for those pieces of conflict or those flaws or differences? So you want to have a conversation about these things, because dismissive avoidants tend to be very reasonable and very rational. And so when this is brought to them in a logical form, it can actually go a very long way. And it can be good for you to not have those expectations put on you, but it can also be great for the avoidant to realize some of these things about themselves. And it can actually be helpful and healing for them. Last but not least, you want to be communicating your needs. Okay. You want to be communicating your needs with 3 key ingredients: positive framing, paint a picture, and you want to see these needs through and not be afraid to remind them. What I mean by this, in positive framing, there's a big difference between saying, you never meet my needs, you never spend enough time with me or text me enough, versus saying, hey, I would really love for us to work on being more consistent with our texting in a relationship because I really love talking to you. There's a night and day difference in terms of your ability to be heard. Okay. So positive framing is really important. Another thing is we have to paint a picture when we communicate. We can't just say, hey, I need more support, because for one person, support is a back scratch, and another person's support is being more encouraging in the relationship. So you need to be clear. You need to paint a picture of when you're communicating a need, frame it positively, and paint a picture for what it looks like. And last but not least, you need to see your needs through. In other words, you need to make sure you're showing up to communicate these needs on a regular basis. People may not show up at all. They may not even try once to meet a need after you've communicated, done it in a healthy way, seen your needs through. In that case, your deadline's clear. This person's probably not the right person to be in a relationship with. But what we don't want is we go in the polar opposite direction, where we communicate our needs once, the person meets them for 2 months straight, forgets by month 3, and then we make it mean they don't care and they're not trying. Okay, that's not what we want, because somebody's not going to be perfect at it. Sometimes they need these reminders until they get conditioned enough to know what you need and to understand it, that they can show up for the long haul. So these are 3 really important ingredients for this piece here about communicating our needs. That's it for today. Thank you so much for stopping by and for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe to this channel if you're enjoying this, and I can't wait to see you in the next video.